Hello, friends, and welcome back to Market Shares. I'm your host, Tony Blodgett, and as you can see, we're still in Studio B here. The Market Shares studio is being redone. It's almost done, so I think our next episode will be in the new studio. We changed offices recently, moved the whole office to a different location, and so that was the disruption in our space. And luckily for us, we have multiple studios up here in our market. And I gotta tell you, I've talked about this before. It was a big, commitment, a big investment and commitment that I made and we made into creating content, rooms for our loan officers. And I just got to say, if this is something that you haven't ventured into, maybe 2025 is the year where you decide to up your video game and find ways of creating content that works for you. I know for me, it was, it boiled down to making a commitment and a decision that we were going to do this podcast. We were going to do it on a regular basis. And up until, December, we hadn't taken any time off. We shut down for a few weeks during the holidays and while we were moving the studio. But every single Friday, we bring you a new episode of Market Shares. So maybe that's not the thing for you, but maybe there is something you can commit to around video in 2025. And on this episode, you guys, I'm just going to talk about a handful of different things that I think are relevant as we kick off the new year. Hopefully you saw last week's episode with Dan Habib. We got a little crunched on time, so I'm gonna dive into kind of reviewing a couple of the things that we talked about, expanding on a few of the things that Dan and I talked about on last week's episode. But if you missed that, go back and check it out. We talked about the Fed and their rate cut and what's going on there. We talked about some predictions for both interest rates and the mortgage market and the housing market in 2025. And we touched on crypto, all of which I'm going to just kind of touch on as we go through this conversation here today. So, I think the big thing is, as I think about Dan's comments around the Fed rate cut, which they did do a Fed rate cut December 18th. But the initial reaction was mortgage interest rates got worse. And, I just want to give my perspective on this a little bit. Look, I think the Fed is, he used a comment in the speech that he gave after, during the Q&A session, and he kind of referenced, that feeling when you walk into a dark room that's full of furniture and, you don't really want to hit anything. Now, that's kind of a strange thing for the Fed chairman to say in a Q&A. I mean, that's not exactly giving a lot of confidence to the marketplace that you know what's going on. So that was surprising to me. But it also, what it tells me is that there's so much uncertainty about what's going to happen in 2025 and the years beyond. I'm assuming mostly due to the fact that we have a new administration coming into office. They've made a lot of comments on what exactly they want to do. And some of these things are very drastic, right? You've seen the cabinet members that they've proposed. I mean, some of these people are seen as, quite controversial by many and extreme. You've seen them talk about the formation of Doge with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and their kind of mandate there to drastically, cut government spending, cut the size of government, maybe even completely cut out certain departments within the federal government. These are kind of unprecedented things. And so I think it creates a lot of uncertainty. We talked about tariffs. What's the impact of that, right? All of these things that the Trump administration has been talking about on the campaign trail now for the last year leading up to the election. And now the Fed and everybody else, quite frankly, doesn't know what the impact of those things are going to be in the market. And so I feel like what the Fed might be doing a little bit here is a little bit of CYA, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen, so let's not be as optimistic about inflation coming down, and so on and so forth. Let's kind of hedge our bets a little bit here. Let's give ourselves some air cover. Look, the Fed can always pivot, you guys. We talked about this with Dan briefly, but the Fed can at any moment get up there during one of their speeches or leak out some information or whatever they want to do that can give confidence back to the market that they're going to pivot their stance and take more aggressive action to ease monetary policy. But I think they're kind of they want to kind of pull this back in a little bit. I feel like what Jerome Powell did back in September is he kind of like lit a fire and poured some gas on it, and in December kind of threw a blanket on it. It's like, hold on, maybe that fire got a little too exciting. Let's kind of tamper that down a little bit until we know more what's going on, because he doesn't want to have egg on his face. He doesn't want to look bad if things go a different direction. He's got some air cover. So that's my take on it. I don't know. I don't necessarily think that the feeling of that hawkish feeling that we had in that December meeting is really indicative of what we should expect for all of 2025. However, I think we should be prepared for that. And I'm going to talk about that in a second as far as our mindset around the mortgage market and the real estate market in 2025. But I think it's important to note that this might be a little bit of air cover, a little bit of CYA on the part of Jerome Powell until we see what happens. The other thing I want to touch on is just that, right? Talking about the election, talking about what it is the Trump administration has promised they're going to do. Look, I try to be very careful, especially when I'm doing a podcast or I'm working in business. I'm not a political person, right? Obviously, like most people, I have my political beliefs, and I'm pretty down the middle. And there's things on both sides that that resonate with me at any given time. But I don't talk about it a lot in public, and I certainly don't talk about it on a podcast. But here's the thing: is that these are things that, look. Donald Trump won the election. He's been talking about these things that he's going to do for the last year. Whether you like them or not, I think that it's prudent when we're in business to acknowledge the fact that these are the plans that he's laid out that he's going to do, and it should be up to us to at least consider what are the impact of those decisions if they get made. What is going to happen with the tariffs, as an example, or what is going to happen, with Doge and cutting of the federal government. Is he going to be able to drill and frack and do all these things that he said and bring down the price of oil? And what's going to be the impact of that? So, I think we've been in such a polarized, kind of world, if you will, when it comes to politics. But to me, this isn't really political at all. It is just stating the facts of what the incoming president has said he's going to do, and then kind of, pontificating on what's going to be the impact of those things. And I don't think that it's inappropriate to discuss those. Matter of fact, I think it's prudent to acknowledge that these are the things that are creating a little bit of unsettledness within the market. And I think you even see unsettledness with the Fed. Now, with that being said, you got to be careful when you're talking about this stuff with your clients, with other people that you might do business with. So you do want to stay apolitical, but you can't just avoid all these things, because these are big things that impact everybody that everybody is talking about. So it's kind of an interesting time right now, and I know, at least for me, it can be uncomfortable talking about these sorts of things, but how do we not mention them as we try to predict what it is going to happen with the economy, with interest rates, so on and so forth, as we move forward into 2025. Now, with that being said, I mentioned this on the podcast with Dan last week, and what I believe, and you've heard me say this a number of times, and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to say it with an exclamation point, is, in my opinion, it's the oil prices that are going to be the biggest determining factor on what happens with interest rates, mortgage interest rates specifically. Now, we can talk about, Fed rate cuts. We all know that's short-term rates, not long-term rates. We can talk about CPI and PCE and core PCE and Fed's favorite, thing to look at and all that stuff. We can talk about employment numbers. And yeah, of course, all of those things are important, some more important than others. I would argue inflation and jobs are going to be the most important thing to understand what the Fed's going to do. But as far as mortgage interest rates go, I've seen a lot of charts on how it is that rates move. And the one thing that is crystal clear to me is if oil prices, is the price of oil, if the price of a barrel of oil goes down, so do mortgage rates. And if it goes up, so do mortgage rates. And the two are very closely associated. So whenever I'm looking at any problem, any, I'm trying to solution for something, I look at what are the big things? What are the big rocks that we need to identify? And in me, this one's simple. If oil prices cut in half, which I think that's what Trump said, we're going to cut the price of oil in half. Okay. Well, I don't know how the oil companies are going to feel about that. That's a whole nother conversation. But if, let's just say that happened, you guys, mortgage rates are going to go down. Inflation is going to go down. That's just going to happen. And so anyway, I think it's interesting, but that's my take. The thing I'm watching the closest is what do oil prices do? And I think that's going to be very telling. Now, as far as my prediction, I said on that conversation with Dan, like I'm not going to necessarily predict what I think interest rates are going to do. I've done that in the past. And the reality is I have no clue. If I had something I could feel good about, then I would tell you that, and I'll take my lumps, and I have no problem putting myself out there and telling you why I think something is the way that it is. I think that we're going to see more of the same until we see a reason for something different. Okay. So I know that's not super clear, but look, I don't think rates go up drastically. I don't think they go down drastically, but I think they could depending on what happens. I don't see a lot of situations where rates go up significantly. Could they trend up a little bit more? Could inflation, trend up a little bit more? Absolutely. Rates could get a little bit worse. They could maybe re-reach the highs that we've already seen over the last year and a half. But as far as how low they're going to go and how long they're going to stay there, that is very data dependent, and it really depends on, I think, what happens with the price of oil. If it can get, if that can drive down. Obviously, we could get lower rates with lower inflation and unemployment going up. Those things would obviously get us there quickly as well. So I don't have a lot of predictions there. Now, Dan Habib did say he could see rates reaching a level that the previous lows that we saw here recently. And that would put us somewhere just under 6%, like 5 7/8, let's say. Okay, so maybe we see a 5 7/8 interest rate, at some point here in 2025. Certainly not the fours. If you guys remember, I did a podcast where I showed that once the Fed starts cutting rates, at some point, in every other Fed rate cut cycle, the interest rate will meet or cross over the median outstanding interest rate of all mortgage debt, which we think that number is probably around 4.5 right now. Like you look at all the outstanding mortgages and what the average rate is on those, which obviously is going up, right? Because more and more mortgages get added to that pool, that rate's going up. But let's say that number is in the 4.5, probably closer to 4.5 right now, 4 5/8. On its way up slowly because there's a lot of loans that are under 4%. And at some point, those two numbers are going to cross. Now, maybe that's in 2025. Maybe it's not until 2026. But it does tell me that rates at some point in this cycle will probably get into the low fives, possibly the high fours. But is it going to happen in 2025? I'm not going to bank on it. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to bank on it. Do I think it could happen? Sure. I think there could be lots of things that I could think of that could create this a black swan event just with what's going on in the world around us that could make that happen. But I'm not predicting it, and I'm not going to build my assumptions. I'm not going to build my business plan assuming that we're going to see interest rates get any better than they are right now. And I think that would be probably prudent for all of us to assume more of the same and then build our strategies around that. Now, the good news is that I think the average consumer is getting used to rates where they are. So at least we don't have this, freak out factor when you quote them a rate that they're shocked that rates are that high. I mean, this has been going on now for a few years. I think people are used to it. And now you're hearing from the Fed, this whole idea of higher for longer, it's definitely playing out. And I think that, we're in a place where people are used to, they don't like it, but they're used to rates being where they are. So that's my thought there. I think that it's more important than ever to build rapport with your clients, right? I don't think that it's a good strategy to make the relationship with your customer all about the interest rate that you can offer them. I think we all know this, but do we all have strategies in place when we get a new client to make sure that we slow down, we take the time to really get to know them? I recommend a very thorough initial conversation with them that goes over a lot of their goals. I like to do my pre-approval right there. You've probably seen me do that. I walked through it on a podcast once, just my pre-application process, where I'm asking them a lot of questions and not only giving myself the information I need to let them know what's their best options moving forward, but also gives me an opportunity to build rapport with them throughout that conversation. That's more important than ever. And I also think it's more important than ever to try to structure a process in which you can expect, let's say 50%, 30 to 50% of your active clients to refer you somebody while you're in the loan process. Look, we all know that borrowers that are going through the process of purchasing a home are talking about that at every family function, they're talking to their friends, they're talking to, any events they go to. It's like the most important thing going on in their life at that time. Just like if they were having a baby, they'd be talking about that. That's the most important thing going on in their life. So it's normal for people to talk about their home buying process and experience while they're going through it. And so you got to be very intentional about creating a system in which you can try to get referrals from your clients while they're in process, which I understand it's difficult because you haven't actually closed their loan yet for them. You haven't done what you might feel is necessary to earn that referral. Well, guess what? You got to find ways of doing that. And, I've talked about that on the podcast before, but more important than ever, and I'm seeing people do this very successfully right now because there's so many fewer opportunities to prospect for new business. You really want to count on your active clients helping you to find that next customer. And you can do that if you do a great job at slowing down, building rapport, asking for referrals up front, and then asking for referrals during the loan process at the appropriate times. So I wanted to point that out because I think that's huge. I just did a whole class on this for some of our salespeople the other day, and it just was top of mind for me. Okay, so the other thing that, I wanted to talk to Dan about this. They have a program called a CMA, a Certified Mortgage Advisor, and I wanted to ask him about that, but really, the reason I put it on my notes here for today's show is because I think it's really important that we're able to talk with our clients about what's going on in the market. Maybe getting your CMA is a good way to do that. I certainly would not discourage you from doing that. It's a program that MBS Highway offers. But more than that, I think it's just investing time every single day in reading about what's going on in the market, specifically the mortgage market, and what's happening, why it's happening, so on and so forth, right? You want to be able to, I'd be listening to every Fed announcement, what Jerome Powell said, then I would watch a couple of YouTube videos that, break down what it is that he said, in ways that I could understand if I didn't understand it myself, so that you can have these conversations with your clients and with your borrowers. People are really drawn to people who have that sort of knowledge, and it also can help you talk someone through the idea of purchasing right now, even though rates are elevated, and letting them know not what rates are going to do. I'm not a fan of using your knowledge of, fiscal understanding, fiscal literacy, if you will. I'm not a fan of using that to be someone who predicts interest rates for your clients. I would actually discourage you from doing that. What I would recommend is letting them know what could happen if these things happen, right? Say, if this happens, here's what we expect, mortgage interest rates to do. If this happens, here's what we expect. Here's the places where you can watch and monitor this. And if you see that move, you're going to want to reach out to me because we might be able to save you money, right? Something like that. So be careful, but make sure you're educated and make 2025 the year that you learn this stuff. And you don't have to learn it all at once. This isn't like sit down and take a crash course for the next 30 days in January here and learn everything there is to know. This is something that I would recommend you ingest a little bit of information about on a daily basis. Subscribe to an MBS Highway or some other service like that is giving you daily updates on what the 10-year is doing. What are mortgage-backed securities doing? Why are they doing that? Start to learn the patterns and so on and so forth, and make that a part of your business where you're comfortable talking about these things with both your referral partners and your clients, and elevating yourself as kind of a trusted resource when it comes to market intelligence, what's going on in the market. Be careful about predictions. Don't make any promises. There's ways of navigating that, but you got to know what you're talking about. And the last thing I wanted to touch on, which we started to talk about on that podcast with Dan, and I'm definitely going to have him back to talk about this, is cryptocurrency. I think so many people shy away from even acknowledging that cryptocurrency exists. And the reality is, as we move into 2025, this is becoming much more mainstream. I think that it's important that you at least have a level of education around specifically Bitcoin, but really just cryptocurrency in general. It's something that I'm going to do in 2025. I have a Coinbase wallet. I have a little bit of crypto. I've made some money. I've lost some money. I've never sold any, so I've bought it. And so I guess I've made money, but the reality is it's gone up, it's gone down, and it is what it is. I haven't really, I'm not like a trader, if you will. I just bought some, and it's done very well for me, although it's not a ton of money. But I want to learn more about it, because there's no question in my mind. You go watch a couple of these podcasts out there, look up Michael Saylor, who I mentioned on the podcast, who is the CEO of MicroStrategy. Whether you like the guy or not, or invest in that stock, doesn't really matter, but just listen to a couple of his podcasts and you'll be like, holy smokes. And just understanding this stuff, being able to speak to it, because the reality is that, and Dan mentioned it, the majority of people who invest in crypto are your younger demographics, right? And in that youngest demographic, I think he said 18 to 24, maybe it was, or, anyway, under 30 years old, only 8% of them own homes, but a large percentage of them are investing in crypto. So you're going to have some clients who might come to you and, they're into crypto, they know about it. You're going to want to at least be able to speak intelligently about it. So I would recommend, even though it does not directly correlate to the mortgage and real estate space, it is something that I would recommend you educate yourself on and understand. I would personally probably buy a little bit. You don't have to go buy a Bitcoin. It's over 100,000 right now. You can buy, $10,000 of Bitcoin if you wanted. You'd only own a fraction of one Bitcoin, but nonetheless, it would put you in the game, and you could watch it, you could see what's going on, you could speak intelligently about it, and that might be a recommendation. It's certainly not investment advice, because I don't have any investment advice as it relates to crypto, at least not now. As I educate myself, maybe in the future, I'll have a better opinion about that. But I do think just being involved with it, right? It's kind of like people that play fantasy football, right? Like if you don't play fantasy football and people are talking about fantasy football, you're like, I don't even know what you're talking about, right? You're not relating at all. But if you've ever played fantasy football and someone's talking about fantasy football, you know exactly what you're talking about, how it works, and the bye weeks and swapping out your players and all the stuff, and the draft and all the things you go through. And all of a sudden you're like part of a club. Well, that's where you could put yourself with just by being in the game, even at a small amount, it allows you to kind of be relevant in those conversations, and to think that your clients and potential clients, especially the younger ones, the first-time home buyers, aren't at all knowledgeable about Bitcoin, I think is a bit naive. So anyways, just something to think about, something that came to mind that I thought I would mention, as we didn't really have a huge agenda for this conversation today, but just some talking points as we move into 2025, things that I think that maybe you should think about and consider. So that's all I really wanted to share with you guys today. Look, I really appreciate those of you who reach out to me or that I see when I'm out and about and say, man, we watch market shares, all the time, and we really enjoy it. Thank you for that. That is encouraging and keeps me going. If you do enjoy this content, let people know about it. That's what I would hope. And in 2025, I hope to grow this channel even larger. I'm going to look to bring out, good, relevant information. Like, these are great topics. It's a very casual conversation, but that's okay. I want it to be casual. I want it to be interactive. I want you to feel like, hey, it's like you're just sitting down with me having a conversation. Hopefully you learn some things, some nuggets to take away, some ideas that might inspire you on how to, run your business. And I'm going to bring you some really good interviews. So we kicked it off with Dan. He's great. We're going to have him back. We're going to do a deeper dive into crypto. So if you want to learn, if you make crypto something that you commit to learning more about in 2025, make sure when you see that episode come out, you check it out. You should probably just subscribe right now to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. They're going to continue to roll to you in 2025 every Friday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific. We launch a new episode, and until then, take care.